What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? We're back with another development stream for Xibalba, for the RTS of Xibalba Caused Monarchy, which is what you see on your screen right now. Appreciate the follow. Whatever your username is, I can't pronounce that right now. So, we're going to be getting into this very shortly. The first order of business, is to advertise that I do indeed have some write-up about the immersive content, the single-player content of the RTS Caused Monarchy. So, you can take a look at my sort of design philosophy, put to a few words here in this opening section. And then we also have some content here. So none of these individual campaigns have been defined in any capacity, but if you head on over to the tutorials section, it is possible to read a little bit more about my design philosophy about tutorials, where I think they're often wrong, and then also my plans overall for the first set of tutorials that we have here. So I do even have a mission documentation for the first tutorial. That is just one mission long, so that's the whole thing in totality. Check that out if you feel like it at some point through this stream or later, and we'll just continue adding to that throughout the couple of days that are to come. Once this is taken care of, I can start working on the Sycoran campaign planning, which is, of course, our first proper campaign after the tutorials are completed, so you can stay tuned for that as well. So, let's consider our options here, because today, obviously, we're going to be doing a little bit of a different kind of stream, where before we were doing tech map for Ansifi. We were defining all of the units and stuff. And by the way, we have 69 units on the Ansifi page. It's pretty hilarious. Specifically, we have 42 units and 27 structures. I think that's pretty insane that we managed to do that. I haven't actually counted the... if I go to the Cause Monarchy page, I haven't actually counted how many units, for example, the Terrans have, even all told. So I guess we can do that math real quick. But it is very funny to me that we have that much progress, and also that it's 69 in total. And of course, that the units are 42. It's like nested simulations all the way down, you know what I mean? So we got 7 over here. This is another 7, so that's 14. 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. So that's 26 if you don't count spider mines. I guess you can throw it in there, whatever. 27. So that's 30, or this is 27. So this is 40. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So 56, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So 63, 4, 5, 6. 7, 8, 9, 70, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So all told, we've got 76 units for Terran, and the fact that we're knocking on the door after only a week or so of development for the Ansifi tech tree is pretty epic, so I'll take that. Anyway, we do have something else, though, for you. We've got the Sycora, because I've been working on these guys for the past day and a half, or 2 days, I guess. Today's the second day of me working on them. So they've been coming into their own themselves. We still are pretty light, obviously, as you can see on stuff. We only have a spattering of things, but I am working on their general concepts and figuring out what their units and compositions are going to be, and also how they progress through the tech tree. So there's certain traits that I know about the Sycora from the Xibalba page, and if we scroll down here, we can click Sycora. We see that there's just a whole bunch. I think I actually updated this page to get rid of that formatting issue. There you go. So the Sycora have some documentation on how they use their like the kinds of technology that they have, right? So I know that they build their structures from other structures. I know that they have conventional segmented tech progression, just like the Ansifi do, where there's a tech structure, a tech structure, a tech structure with each tier. But at the same time, their production structures are actually tiered. So that means that maybe more utility structures would make their move in the Sycoran tech tree, if you will. And the other thing that it opens up that I might explore is actually locking one of the branches behind a tier 2 tech wall of sorts. So this schism of the severed branch might actually be a tier 2 thing, so you only actually have access to the Martyrium and the Clerisy for these 2 branches themselves. But all in all, we have some cool stuff here. So you can obviously check that out through the tech map link in the Sycora section, or you can just follow the URL here. It's not that hard to figure out. But either way, we got this. We're going to be working on this. What's up, Betsujin? This is not necessarily a spiritual successor. We go through the whole thing. You can read all about it. But basically, It started off as a Brood War mod, and Brood War is obviously a really poor engine in terms of being able to be customizable. You have to reverse engineer and memory hack a bunch of stuff, right? So we were like, all right, we've done this. We've gotten our chops as designers and programmers and whatever else. It's time to move on to greener pastures and make our own thing. So we're building our own engine. That's well underway at this point. And we are starting to, I've been building the world, which is documented here in the Xibalba page. If you do !Xibalba, you'll get a link, although I think it's in the stream description anyway, so might help there. And then obviously we also have plans for not just an RTS, but multiple games in this universe. But the RTS is going to be the first one to bring to bear, and it is Cause Monarchy. That's the name of it. So we've got, you could say it's very much inspired by StarCraft, but the primary way that it deviates is the sheer scale of things. We've got 20 planned regencies, which are our version of factions or races. So instead of 3 like in Brood War, or 4 like in Warcraft 3, or whatever the case may be elsewhere, Age of Empires might have a considerable number of civilizations, I think they call them, when you're playing as a faction in there. But there's a lot of overlap and a lot of shared stuff. We've got 20 completely unique ones planned, and in retail we'll have 6 ready. That's the plan initially, is to release with 6 and then add the rest of them over time whenever they are finished. So the sheer scale of what's possible in this is completely different than any other RTS ever attempted. So yeah, we're working on it, man. We're working on it. So yeah, at that point, eventually we'll have our own art assets and stuff. Right now we're dealing with a lot of like icons from other sources for the tech map. But that's just for visualization purposes. We'll work on our own art later. That's probably the toughest part about this, is that we plan to have like an average of we plan on having about an average of 100 units per race. And that and that's not including buildings. So buildings would probably put it to about 140, I'm thinking. And because of that average, even if it's a little bit lower than that or something, it's still like when you add in buildings, it's definitely over 100 for each regency. And because of that, there's going to be a lot of, shall we say, pressure on the art for that. There's a lot of work ahead of us, but for now, we'll probably just use a bunch of placeholder stuff. And eventually, when we filter out all the, we'll basically have to go through different passes, different phases of development for the art, I think. Because when you think about it, it's like, you've got the first thing that we do is just use some art that's not very coherent, but it's like from some other source, because we're not like selling the game at any point until it's completely ready. So we can afford to basically be like, all right, we've got a race whose art is all made up of, like, oh, you've got stuff from this game and stuff from that game and like all different sources, and we've just repurposed it for our needs. Then as time goes on, I'll get better, and other people in the development team will get better with actually making models or to use for sprite sheet renders, because this is a 2D game, and we'll actually be able to tweak that stuff in general and do a pass of like work in progress, iterative models, placeholder models that will continue to improve, but it'll be our own stuff, and then we can start doing promotional materials with that, because I won't feel like I'm gaining mind to share with people by using like StarCraft assets or something. That would obviously be pretty bad. So yeah, and then obviously we also want a bunch of possibilities for making maps and whatnot. It's not really going to be that difficult to balance, because I'm the main guy who's doing the design. Other people have some ideas, but everything filters through my lens, and I'm all about designing things that have plenty of counterplay to them. And even if you're maybe a tier or 2 down in tech compared to somebody else, if they don't position their very expensive heavy units well, then you can take advantage of that. Like, so there's going to be skill expression at all levels of play. And because of that, I don't think it'll be difficult to balance anything at all. There's stuff that's super powerful, like in the Brood War mod rendition of this. We have something called the Star Sovereign, which is like everybody's favorite thing to point at and say, this is busted, because it has behavior that channels for 5 seconds and then unleashes a 15-second long blast of damage that deals 2,500 damage in the area. And I can even just demonstrate this. But the idea behind this is that it's basically meant to make good on the promise from the Brood War cutscene, the intro cutscene, where we basically have this glassing event, right? So we have this actually implemented in the Brood War mod, and it's not actually nearly as busted as it seems on its surface, because it's immobilized. It doesn't deal damage to air units. It's only ground. So you can just snipe it with fighters. If you kill it before it's not like the glassing beam is in there perpetually. So if you shoot it down, even as it started to blast stuff, it will interrupt it. All of that stuff is pretty solid. So generally speaking, like even the most powerful stuff here, like the ion cannon, for example, that deals 200 damage and has a ridiculous range of 36, which is like 3 times higher than a siege tank, and pretty wide area of effect. That also leaves behind a damaging field over time. Like there's a lot of stuff going on in these concepts, but they're not difficult to balance because you just give players opportunities to deal with them. You give them other tools on their side. So I've heard this compared to Dota, because Dota 2 apparently had at some point, maybe still does, a balancing philosophy of everything is overpowered, therefore nothing is overpowered. I kind of like that, but I would put a little bit more nuance on it. I would say like you're designing stuff with clear weaknesses that can be exploited by intelligent players, and that's essentially what you're doing. Is you're kind of unifying the mechanical execution aspect of, do you have the APM necessary to perform the actions with speed and precision, and then you're combining that with the strategic aspect. You have the game knowledge and the composition and the strategic know-how, basically, to counter this thing appropriately. So that way you have much more nuanced stuff than hard counters. So we don't just say, oh, infantry is countered by air or whatever. But you have the ability to say, oh, this unit is kind of slow. Therefore, if I take a long range unit or a short range but fast unit, I can like sort of outrun it maybe and kite it. There's all sorts of options that I have. So that's basically the idea behind it, is even though we have a ridiculous number of units, I don't think it'll be massively, anything that's really obviously imbalanced will be so obviously imbalanced that I can just fix it. And that's been the true, it's been a bit of a truism for the Brood War mods development as well, because we've added a bunch of stuff and then some stuff is broken, and it's obviously broken, so I just fix it. So yeah, I'm not concerned about balance. I mean, some people probably are, even if in the dev team or in the enthusiast space that we have on Discord, where we have our own server. People who are following the game's development probably are a bit concerned, like, oh, I don't know if this Pronogo guy knows what he's talking about. But I've got experience doing this before, and I'm confident that the process, I kind of trust in the process at this point to take me to the promised land, even if I initially on some initial point, like there might be something broken there. So we'll see, but I'm pretty sure we'll get there pretty easily. And I'm glad you liked the website. Yeah, we worked pretty hard on assembling this thing. I didn't do much of the work in the sense of the actual programming of the website, but the website itself was put together. Basically, I came up with the specifications, if you will, and we sort of evolved from there. So yeah, it's pretty cool. So like I was saying about the Sycora earlier, they have their buildings are created by their town centers, which poses an interesting question as to, like, I've already solved how they expand, because they have global behaviors like the convalescence behavior, which is true for all units and structures, where anything within a sight range of a Sycoran unit, that Sycora player can place a structure there. I don't think this will happen, or I don't think this will work for allied units, which might get a little crazy or weird. And I'm thinking kind of like if we take like a zealot here from Brood War, I would imagine that, like, if you've got a unit that's revealing a certain area, right, then as long as you have active sight vision of this, you would probably be able to throw down a structure here. But it would have to be your unit, which is where things get a bit crazy. Maybe it would just be any ally. That would probably require a bit of testing, because I feel like that would be pretty busted, but fundamentally, it's not really that different than you just having a unit over there. It's a bit cleaner. But I guess when you're sort of like how when you are trying to place a structure as Protoss and you see the blue aura fields of the pylons, I think you'd probably have some sort of like map of what is even like available to be placed. So I'm not really concerned from a UI standpoint, more for a game balance and consistency standpoint, but we'll see about that later. And yeah, the collision stuff is pretty I think it's pretty neat because we basically have the opportunity to have different classes of units in terms of like even air units will collide with each other, which they didn't do in either game, Brood War or StarCraft 2, but in StarCraft 2 you had like air units would declump very quickly, which was their way of trying to stop like magic boxing from working, where you would decollide a bunch of units and then just sort of fly them around and use the patrol micro thing to instantly make them attack. That was that was a bit weird. I don't really know why they went the route that they did, to be honest. StarCraft 2 is just a disaster when it comes to design. It was like really poorly made. Cargo cult RTS at its finest, where people are like trying to copy the success of something without really understanding what it did. And then they make changes to that formula without understanding what they're throwing out. They're definitely an example of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, as the old adage goes. But I think that the idea of providing collision only with your plane, unless it's a structure, obviously, is pretty unique. And I think it will serve us pretty well overall. Because we basically get the opportunity to have air units that collide with other air units, but only of a certain class. So if you have like small air units, those will collide with each other, but those can fly underneath flagships that are orbiting like higher up. And so you'll get a sense of scale and mobility with the army. It does have the potential to be a bit difficult to read, particularly if the bigger units are obfuscating the smaller units. So we might actually want to change that so that the flagships are lower to the ground and the fighters are above. But I'm not sure about that. That'll need some tweaking, and like everything else, we'll just have to continue iterating. Okay, so let us return to. Oh yeah, this is my plan for today. I've already been working on the Sycora tech map and stuff, but I will be doing some more on this stream. Guess we can close that for now. So far, I've separated the branches for the Sycora into 3 distinct categories. Well, 4 when you count infrastructure. I'm actually not sure what kinds of things will be in infrastructure as combatants or utility units for the Sycora, but I do know that I want a decent amount of like shield rejuvenation and stuff. I know I want I know I want interactions with shields because I think that's probably one of the more interesting aspects of the overall Regency, how they interact with shields. I also think it's pretty interesting. I think it'll be an interesting way to interact with the fact that you get that speed boost if you're low on shields. Like maybe some high tier unit will like allow the like convert shields into some other stat, maybe like a temporary boost to armor. And then you'll get the speed bonus and be a little bit more durable. That would be like a high tier support unit maybe. Because then you're interacting with that system in a more interesting way. As far as single player campaigns in Cosmonarchy go, yeah, the content... So fundamentally, I don't actually think there is a difference. Or I don't think there ought to be a difference between single player content and multiplayer content, in the sense that you should be challenged when you're playing a game. When you're playing a game that is competitive, that should be there should be a source of challenge present no matter what you're actually playing, right? So if we accept that Cosmonarchy is designed to be played competitively, and then we accept that content within Cosmonarchy is meant to have first-party content at the very least, right? Content that I'm making and the other developers are making that are on the development team themselves. If we accept that premise, that everything is meant to be built around the idea that we are competing for the player's time by saying, this is not just a grind. This is not just, poorly presented stories and stuff like other RTS games tend to be. but it's actually a fair battleground where an opponent is competing with you and trying to defeat you and trying to get their own victory conditions achieved. When we approach the design of a scenario from that perspective, and then when the player also has bought in to the idea of competing in a game, that's where I think you get a nice little marriage between the player and the developer, the player and the content that they're going to be experiencing, because we are initially guiding players towards the idea, even in the tutorials, mind you. The tutorials are guiding players to the idea that your opponents are playing by the same rules as you are, that your opponents are trying to win just like you're trying to win, or just like you ought to be trying to win if you're playing the game, right? So we're setting the expectation that even the AI in the tutorials are trying to defeat you, and obviously the counter is you should try to defeat them because they're trying to defeat you. So that is what is required in order to win, to even beat the basic tutorial, is to demonstrate some understanding of how the overall setup is going, right? So the first tutorial is a brand new regent. We call our commanders regents because regencies. And we have the very first tutorial is a complete introduction to the idea of a real-time strategy game. So most people will skip this because most people who are going to play Cosmonarchy have probably played an RTS before. And this is not a required reading tutorial or whatever for people to jump in if they've already played an RTS game. If they are familiar with the control scheme of most RTS games, then they don't need to play this. And if they are still kind of confused about the new things that Cosmonarchy introduces, that the control scheme of Cosmonarchy has compared to other games, they will either learn that intuitively as they progress throughout the games, the other content, or they can enable like verbose tooltips or something where you'll actually see more information on them. And maybe there will be some sort of prompt when you first start the game that says like, would you like to enable verbose tooltips? And maybe some justification for that says like, Cosmonarchy has a tweaked control scheme compared to other RTS titles. And that prompt would only even display if you had acknowledged that like the first tutorial is only recommended if you've played RTS games before. Would you like to play it? Something like that. Or if you haven't played it, rather. Because the whole idea is that I want to make the game, to use a dreaded word, accessible. I want to make it accessible to people who actually want to try to play, who want to try to improve, and who want to seek out new challenges and seek out a new genre even. So if there are people out there who haven't really played RTS that much, or who don't feel very confident in their skills as an RTS player, even if they're sort of familiar with some control scheme elements, they should play the first tutorial. It's called New Tricks. The whole idea is that you're going to be learning a thing or two, and you're going to come in and, initially things are going to be very slow going while you get essentially instructed by a character who in universe is the whole idea behind this character is that they give orders to newcomers and they decide whether or not they're ready for combat on the field. And that's the whole idea behind the mission, actually. The whole conceit in universe is that even in the first basic tutorial that walks you through the control scheme, there's a reason for that dialogue to exist. It's not just move your mouse to the next area and right click or whatever. It's like order your soldiers to move to this location. Or whatever, it's more grounded, you could say. So that's the main plan, anyway, of the first tutorial. But the tutorial ends with you having to defeat an AI-controlled regency that is sharing the same exact tech tree as you. So there's not really information overload in that sense. They have all access to all the same units you do, and you just walk through and have to defeat them. If you're able to defeat them, which you should be able to because they're not massively skilled. The idea is that you're basically instantly using the skills that you've just learned in the tutorial and your understanding of the control scheme to defeat an opponent that is actually trying to defeat you, even if they're a little dumb with the way that they try to do that. So there's a little bit more information here if you wanted to read through this section, but the bulk of the idea, anyway, for even the first tutorial is to present players with a challenge, to present players with something that they have to meet or exceed, or attempt to exceed, anyway, and see where that goes. What's up, Bethrelethal? All right, so I think we've We've covered some of that stuff, simply enough. Yeah, no problem. Glad to clear up some things. I think it's inevitable that the game turns some heads just because its design is so different. It is funny you say that, Balathal, because the design idea behind Rotoro, the enemy that you're going to face in the tutorial, is that he's very balls to the wall, like aggressive to a point where he's like very disrespectful. Basically, like if it was a real player where you were facing off in a 1v1, it would be like if this guy decided to cut all of his spending on workers and just pump units forever until he won. Like trying to beat, it'd be like trying to beat somebody with a Zergling rush, but only Zerglings. Like you four pool and you just keep Zergling forever, and that's all you do. It's kind of like that. That's the plan, anyways. To just have him send unit after unit after unit, which sounds kind of scary if you're new. But the defender's advantage will be such in the map, in the layout, in the terrain, that the initial assaults will be fairly easy to fend off, and there will be some dialogue about like Rotoro's up to his old tricks again, see if you can flank his forces or something like that. And the idea is that the guy in universe doesn't respect your trainee character that you're following. So there's a protagonist for the mission who's a new trainee, and you have to earn the respect from Rotoro. So you have to maybe destroy one of his bases before he smartens up a bit, or maybe he doesn't. Maybe he's just like then a little angry that he's lost a base, and he's like, "Fuck you, I'm gonna kill you," and just even more so spends up. So the idea anyway is that you get a little insight into how personality can affect the AI and how some of those things will change over time. But yeah, that's the main idea. Yeah, cool. Good to know. But I think it's just because the fact that we're going for the idea that like people who play RTS games, so people who play RTS campaigns tend to know that the campaigns themselves do not often require anywhere close to the same amount of skill that, like finding success in a campaign is, not only is it just generally easier, if you want to use a broad term like that, it's also testing completely different skills than what multiplayer does. And that to me is the main issue. Like, I'm all for a campaign potentially being easier than another campaign that later down the line, or easier than multiplayer at a super high level or whatever. Like, I don't think that you would have to. I don't know that I would ever make a campaign. I'm not ruling it out, but I don't know that I'd ever make a campaign that could only be beaten if you were as skilled as like a top pro player or something. Because I would like to be able to beat my own campaigns, and I'm not that good. So I don't know if that would ever happen. But the main idea that I'm getting at here is that what bothers me more about other campaigns in RTS games is that they just don't test the same skills at all. It's not that they are too easy, because yeah, maybe I'm a higher skill level than, like, obviously I'm going to be way higher skill level than the tutorial AI. But the idea is that if I still have to play an RTS to win, that's satisfactory to me, because at least I have to show that I can harvest resources and I can ascend up the tech tree, and I can put together a unit composition, and I can attack and scout and defeat my opponent with tactics and stuff. Like, I'm doing all of the things that I would have to do against a more skilled player. I just happen to be playing against a less skilled player in this case. And that to me is the key distinction. So all of the missions in Cosmonarchy will be designed around the idea that no matter what you do, you will have to prove that you can play an RTS to at least some degree of skill in order to claim victory. And the tutorials basically say that that's not actually as scary as it sounds, because here's an example of a case where it's actually quite easy to use the mechanics and the systems of an RTS and claim victory using them. And then you can kind of just scale that up with competence. So you can start doing that to, with more other regencies, other tech trees, other compositions. So maybe you have an AI ally, and now you've got to keep track of more things on the minimap and stuff. So complexity will scale, and that will naturally increase the difficulty, while also maybe putting you in situations where the terrain isn't as favorable, or the AI are a little bit faster, or whatever the case may be. So, you know how it is. Well, not only do you not have the opportunity to expand, but in most RTS campaigns, custom or otherwise, at least for Brood War, and I would say for a lot of other RTS games out there, the AI doesn't expand. Your opponents don't expand. I think Command and Conquer actually did try to expand a few times in some of those missions, and you generally did have expansion places for you as well. The older Command and Conquer games. I'm thinking 1 and 2, Red Alert 1 and 2. I feel like maybe the AI did expand in some of those, but I don't recall the Warcraft AI ever expanding in 1 and 2. I might just be remember. I haven't played that game in so long now, a couple of years now, so hard for me to remember. But it does feel like there's a lot of just lackadaisical sort of like the AI is fed money. They're playing by different rules. They have they start out with a bunch of units. Like what I'm designing around and what I go into in the immersive section of the Cosmonarchy page is that I talk about. I'm trying to think about the idea of. I think I talk about it in summary, but the main idea is also described here. Um, they're built around the core principle of engagement. There's something about fairness. Yeah. Um, Starting conditions, team compositions, and player objectives vary between maps, but fairness is front and center in the content's design. If you are skilled enough to match your myriad opponents, you can always win through conventional RTS gameplay without ever experiencing arbitrary tech restrictions that limit player expression or suffering through slapstick pace changes that remove entire aspects of the gameplay loop. Obviously, these are referencing events that are pretty commonplace in Brood War campaigns, especially Blizzard's own campaigns, where they would just remove entire bits of the tech tree or send you through a micro mission, a commando mission, where you don't even have a base, so you're not even playing the same game. Like, I don't think you need to change the pace by completely changing the genre of game you're experiencing. I think you can change the pace in a campaign by making it so that you've got more enemies in the next mission, or a bigger map in the next mission, or a map that's maybe built more around islands, so it requires more transport or other event means of movement or something like that. You know, there's like a ton of different ways to change the pace while still keeping it grounded in RTS gameplay, and that's what I think. Unfortunately, no other RTS game I've ever played has actually done. So. And I have played a lot, admittedly. So. What's up, Beaver? Yeah, you know, the funniest thing about StarCraft 2 is that the latest scenarios I think they've released are those co-op ones. And the co-op ones are just a straight formula. Expand once, and then deal with waves of enemies that are spawned in, to the point where you can wipe the entire map and delete the enemy bases, as you often do on even the highest difficulty. And the AI will still just spawn waves in. Like, there are just triggers that spawn waves and waypoint them into your base. It's like, okay, great. Very good experience. It's like there's never any sense of parity between a player and an AI in single player or cooperative RTS content. And that's something that I definitely want to change with Xibalba and Cosmonarchy. It's something that I definitely think is long overdue to change. So, and the Brood War mod for Cosmonarchy, the Brood War mod edition of Cosmonarchy, obviously the AI was a bit cheating insofar as they came in and they had a multiplier for their resources. So they still needed to harvest resources. They started out with the same resources the player would. But the little catch there is that when they returned a resource, depending on their race, because the different races were competent to different degrees, more like incompetent to different degrees. The different races require different tweaks for to be actually competitive with players, and that was essentially how I made it so that they were more competitive. Because the AI doesn't have any mechanism to detect, oh, this is a losing fight, I should conserve my men and retreat. No, they never do that. They just waypoint their units into your base. Obviously, they also, up until somewhat recently, were never even microing their units. Veek was able to program some kiting, which was pretty cool. Obviously, we'll have something more complex, and I would say just generally not better in a sense of like raw performance, but better in the sense of like actually useful for our RTS, because it won't be fighting multiple layers of code. So yeah, the bottom line is that we still had to cut a lot of corners and make a lot of concessions with our design in the Brood War mod, and that's entirely due to the code base being obscured and not having access to source code and having to reverse engineer a bunch of stuff. When we're working with our own engine, development's going to be so much faster. We're building the editor recently for making map tools. I can actually show a little bit of this off now, believe it or not, where you guys, like people who are a little bit more frequent frequently looking at the channel and stuff will already have seen a lot of this stuff. But we can actually edit the map in the middle of runtime. So if somebody were to connect to my session right now, which they can't because I'm not running the VPN network right now, what people would be able to walk around the map, like controlling some units, while I decide I kind of want some asphalt here. So I think I'll go into here. Let me see if I can find a blank layer. Here we go. So I think I want some sand here. So I'll do this. Paint some sand. I think I did that right. There you go. And then, it's obviously the default sand color, and I've got a night map. So let me just... I actually don't have the latest build, so this is going to be a bit pranky. I'll just... I think I can make the alpha negative, can I? I don't have the latest build. I'm going to have to rebuild this. Hold on one sec. Way to prank myself in the middle of trying to show something off. There we go. Now we're talking. So now I'll find a blank layer, desert, sand, paint my sand pattern again. It'll be a bit simpler. And then, all right, I need... I'm going to make this like a little pale. And maybe a bit more on the red side. And then darken. And then maybe make it a bit faded. And suddenly I've got sand that blends in a little bit better. So you can just do this in the middle while people were walking around in multiplayer if you wanted to. You could build the entire map and stuff. So there's basically all sorts of stuff that you can do. We're building that editor out so that eventually we have more usable user interface stuff. Probably more fixed, but we'll see how the layout of the UI actually works. Right now it's all done through like text inboxes. We're still very early on, but we're getting there. And it's pretty exciting stuff to be able to fiddle around with that stuff, especially while people are playing. Like, I wanted this feature when I thought about it, but I was never sure if it would actually be legit. But that basically means that if you're a mapper and you're working on a campaign or a scenario, a custom map, whatever, with somebody else, you're one of your buddies, you can both log in and start editing the map together. You can both be in editor mode together and start painting some tiles. Like, all right, you work on the top left corner, I'll work on the middle, stuff like that. We already have access to that technology, and it's I think we've only been developing this engine for about a month and a half. So who said it would be impossible, huh? Yeah, dude. Bailithal, now that we have this, so the map crap contest was basically this like event where you basically were tasked with creating a custom map in a very short amount of time, hence map crap. So it was usually the maps were not very good, in theory. They were actually some of the best content that StarCraft had ever seen, because obviously the bar is so low. But in theory, they would, they're crap in the sense that you could make much better content if you spent a bit longer on it, right? We had an event within that event, like a class of event called Team Crap or something like that. Or Team Night, I think it was. So you could basically, the idea was that you would work together. So usually one person would work on data stuff while the other person worked on the map, because obviously you can't just share the map. You could, but then one person would have to stop working on it. Now you could just boot it up together and start working on a map in real time with each other if you really want to. So the possibilities are pretty endless. So yeah, I think within another month and a half, we'll definitely have like a much more solid editor. We'll have implemented pathfinding and probably AI. Yeah, I think within a month and a half, we'll probably just be back to playing like the Brood War version of Cos Monarchy, but ported to this new engine and with different what would you call it? Some changes made. Like, obviously, we've decided to remove supply because of the scale we want. So we would just remove supply from the Brood War races as well, rather than just like blind porting everything. I'm sure the There will probably be the I don't know. It wouldn't be complicated to program the idea of supply into the game. So I'll probably just have to convince Veek to do that in like an hour at some point. Just so that we have the opportunity if people wanted to do some sort of supply system. Even if it was like a limited supply system where like, oh, you supply for like mercenaries or something. I don't know. I can't really think of any use case for us for what we would want to do, but it's possible. It could be a mechanic for upstarts, which would be really funny. It could be a thing where like the upstarts can't exceed a certain supply total. I don't really think that makes any sense to gimmick them that way, though. All right, so let me talk to you all about Sycora. The Sycora are they obviously come from another reality entirely. So their technology is bound to be very weird and high concept. So far, we've got the 4 branches as usual, but these branches are not separated into infantry, vehicles, and aircraft the way that the Ancifi are. The Ancifi are a lot more familiar, essentially. And the Sycora are very different. So we've got martyrs, and martyrs are basically like well-rounded, unspecialized individuals who are just chilling, in this hostile universe. They're basically the El Clasico. So these guys are going to be the backbone of many armies, generally speaking. We've got the empath tech branch, which is a little bit more about agility and being able to handle enchantments. So these are guys that are going to be support units in many respects that are going to maybe distribute some sort of benefit to allies or enchant maybe specific allies or something to that effect. So they'll be a little bit more utilitarian, also generally more agile than the other branches. And then we've got Severed. So the Severed branch is going to mostly be like, for the most part, they will be crowd controlling or they will be disruptive. So those are their 2 axes that you can gauge them on. And because I've defined these branches, I now also know that if I come up with a concept for a unit, and I initially thought, oh, this will be a martyr unit, and then it come to finds that it's like an enchanting agile unit. I'm like, oh, that actually fits the empath better. Or, oh, I wanted this to be a crowd controlling disruptive unit. Well, then it goes into Severed. So we kind of have these different categories of tech that I can now sort through the whole idea. And to best, I think, anyway, to better differentiate between the different branches, we have different naming conventions for all of these units. So far, we only have a couple of units per branch, but you can see Exodo and Iata. These 2 end with vowels, and they have a decent amount of vowels in them in general. But then if you look to empath, we have Cortalis, we have Sinter, and we have Tylar. These are all ending in consonants, and generally speaking are, well, I guess there's only one that's a little bit longer, but that's a hallmark in general. And then you've got, for Severed, you've got Akoron and Vectral. These are also ending in consonants, but they're a little bit more like, the idea that I have for them anyway is to make them a little bit more punchy with the way that their names are put together. So you'll generally have names that are slightly more on the side of like, I guess you could just say vulgar sounding or sounding very aggressive. So that guttural perhaps in the way that they're pronounced. So you can expect that over time. These are a little bit more like, I think they roll off the tongue a bit more, you could say, over in the empath side of things, as opposed to being a bit more maybe harsh. So those are the initial linguistic rules that I've designed, and we're going to see how far that goes. I am cognizant of the potential to get to a point where I've got too many rules going for one regency, and because I have 18 other regencies to do tech trees for, maybe there could be some issues where it's not 100% grounded. And that's why I actually wanted to start iterating on the linguistic rules initially for the Sycora pretty early on in their tech trees design. Because if I don't do that, then I run the risk of maybe having too many different cases, essentially, where like, oh, similar linguistic rules are being applied to completely different regencies, and thus a unit sounds like another unit, even though it's not even in the same regency. So we got to make sure that we have that sort of thematic consistency. And that's one of the main goals, anyway, that I've got so far. What's going on, Veek? Okay, so at this point, what's up, Alexander? Welcome. At this point, we're looking at obviously a couple of these units that need to be fleshed out. I was also thinking that due to the nature of the severed tech branch, I might actually move it to be requiring tier 2. So the only things that you can initially get are martyr and empath stuff. And then maybe try to isolate the I'm not 100% sure how that would work. That would introduce an interesting inconsistency where we might get to the point where like the schism being at tier 2 means that you only get upgrades for it at tier 4, or maybe the upgraded so like right now we have like the idea anyway that I had was a very clean rule where at tier 1 you'd get the production facilities, at tier 3 you could upgrade those production facilities to a new tier, and then every odd tier you'd get another upgrade potential. I think it might actually make some sense to outright introduce new production facilities. So maybe the Martyrium only goes from tiers 1, 3, and 5, as an example. And then at tier 7, you get, or tier 6 maybe, you get like a brand new production facility that goes, 6, 8, 10. And then so you get these like segments, basically, where you have different facilities entirely. And it still slots into the Martyr tech branch, but it's slightly different in that respect. The other alternative is to just throw out the idea of only having 4 tech branches entirely, which I'm definitely going to have to do for some of the other regencies, most notably Immersive. And we're just going to have like, it'll look very convoluted, I think, but we are going to have like maybe, 6, 7, 8 branches. Specifically with Ember Seed, I actually don't know what to do about them because I would like to have the tech branches be designed around the idea of each branch that's on the website is mapping a what would you call it? It's basically mapping the core idea behind a single embassy, a single member nation of the Ember Seat, because they're obviously a coalition of like countless member nations. So that would probably be something to look into at some point. But might be a bit confusing if I do that because there are so many member nations. I did think about like I think I decided that each embassy that you get is probably going to unlock like a small spattering of units. Like each embassy would be somewhere between 3 and 5 units or 2 and 5 units or something, which would put our embassy count somewhere between 20 and 30. Might be a bit excessive, so I'll have to think about that. Maybe embassies would have like multiple tiers of tech that they operate on, where you could I guess that could even make some intuitive sense because the whole concept is the more embassies you have, the more embassies you can then build. And the idea there is that the break point of having enough embassies gives you access to different tiers of tech. But the idea is that you're now representing the interests of more member nations. Therefore, more other member nations are going to join the battle. You could add on to that by saying, when you have enough interests of the other member nations, the member nations you already have embassies for are then more interested in giving you more of their higher impact technology. They're more expensive fighters or whatever, or they're more valued members. So that could be something where, okay, you've got this embassy you unlocked at tier 3, and it unlocks like 3 units or 4 units or something from that embassy, from that member nation. And then when you get enough of the other embassies out there, you unlock tier 5 tech, that would then in turn unlock some new units from the tier 3 embassy that you previously had. That could be like an example where it's basically saying, oh, you've furthered the interests of the Ember Seat here by getting even more embassies up. So therefore, we're down to send you our heavy tanks or some shit, stuff that you would have not gotten from the tier 3 thing. So I'm not 100% sure if that makes sense, but that could probably alleviate some of the concerns about having way too many fucking branches for representing the actual unit compositions and stuff. So we'll have to think about that. Because the other tough part is that I don't think I can, in good conscience, have a 1 branch per member nation for the Ember Seat, precisely because the production facilities are shared amongst multiple member nations. So the production facilities would be diverged probably based on like some basic idea like infantry, vehicle, spacecraft, something like that. Maybe there would be some more in between there. But that's just some of the initial thoughts that I'm having anyway on the subject. Good to know you finished that concept. I will be checking it out probably after the stream and seeing what I can do in Blender later today. Still haven't done my daily Blender 30 minutes or more. But getting back to it later on. Okay, so now that I've talked about tech branches, I'm going to consider the compositions that you can already make using these options. We've got fairly standard fare infantry unit in the Exodo. The IATA is a bit more on the durable side. Has a double tap with a decent amount of armor pen for tier 1, that's for sure. Oh yeah, and I never updated the costs, so I have to do that. It's going to be like 150, I think. Let me open it up. And then we'll say 20. I think the Cortalis is probably going to be like a very common unit for the Sycora. It's a very effective scouting unit. I've gone back and forth on whether or not it should include a hypervial cost, but I think because the Clerisy itself is planned to have a hypervial cost, that'll probably be sufficient. And then, you know, the center is a bit more of a utilitarian unit, plus a general fighter that you can use to fight off some enemies. I do kind of imagine the idea of like somebody damaging their own center to get it sped up so that they can scout a little bit more aggressively with it or something. Kind of a neat interaction. I have to decide whether or not I'm pulling the trigger on the idea that the schism is going to be tier 2. I don't actually mind that it would introduce theoretical inconsistency, particularly if there's another structure that you get access to at a later tier that is of another tech branch or whatever. Because then it's like there's a precedent set for it. As far as the waylay is concerned, I do have a description for it. Although I still call it Squire in here, which is pretty funny. Probably call this Mason as well. All right. Yeah, I do have this documented here, but I wasn't sure if there was anything in particular that you needed more information about Night of the Realm. So let me know if there's something I can do to elaborate on. I definitely want to do some concept work for... Yeah, okay. I think you might have gotten Susaned. It always happens. Oh, never mind. Let me see what you're talking about specifically. Which, oh, first image, okay. You're talking about this thing. I don't know if you can see my cursor very well, but it's basically the white, the first white bit around the helmet, by the looks of it. Yeah, we definitely want a thin chest plate. These were just here as references for what other exosuits are out there. I think maybe the legs could work out pretty well on that one. And then, yeah, generally speaking, you would just... I was thinking maybe something on the... Something that was kind of interesting to me was like the weird... I don't know if this is a bug with his model, but I kind of like the... whatever's going on here with the stabilizers on the feet. And then I thought that the stabilizer exosuit part of the legs over here was pretty useful too. So I would think some sort of thin chest plate, and then the... It would almost be like an exosuit for the exosuit, if you know what I mean. Like the braces would be on top of other armor instead of just being over like normal clothes or a bare leg or whatever. And I think there'd probably be a similar sort of brace for the arm. You can kind of see something like that here in this one. So oh wait, actually had something. I have 2 monitors. I could probably benefit from another one, but I don't really have the desk space for it. Right now I'm using a standing desk, little pad thing, but... Itera... Have they all had BR this whole time? I haven't even noticed. Whatever, I guess it doesn't really do anything then. Yeah, I guess I could probably throw a wall mount on or something over here. I'd have to take down some of the noise reduction pads, but would probably be useful. I would only really be able to use it massively to any degree if I were actually in standing mode, but I suppose I wouldn't really need anything else then. Yeah, I don't mind that. Just an unfortunate man. We all hope gets help soon. Or at least gets a hobby. I mean, come on now. Brutalized. Sorry, homie. You're probably going to have to hop in the Discord server, to be honest. Pretty daily occurrence at this point, but YouTube doesn't give us any moderation tools, so it's not like we can IP ban him. Subwuck. How you been? What did I call this guy? Just defensive turret. Well, yeah, I don't know much about Warhammer Fantasy, but obviously 40K is something that's pretty well. Uh, it's well documented and something that a lot of people will find parity between um, what I'm doing. Yeah, I was actually thinking about that when I was using the. Where is it? What do we got here? So I was documenting the mission stuff for the overall like setup here, right? And I was noting the size just as brood war values, and I was thinking like I don't know how intuitive that is. Like maybe we just make it built around 100 or something. I do generally want to avoid using fractions just because that obviously doesn't work very well, does it? It couldn't because the value is number of tiles per second. So if I change it from that, it becomes less intuitive, not more. It's like it is referring to a real world value, like an actual value that has impact. It's not just some arbitrary number. Like I think in Brood War it was pixels or something. I don't remember. It's like pixels per second. But we didn't get an actual calculation. I don't really think tiles per minute would be massively useful, though. I think if you have to do more calculations at a glance or more thinking at a glance to know what this means, then it's just a stat that does require a bit of like a bit of understanding. There also isn't a basic foot soldier in the game anyway. Like every tier 1 unit will have different movement speeds pretty much. Like every maverick type unit or whatever. Are you? I guess so. Yeah, even the workers are going to have different values. Workers are also going to have different mining rates. So that's how we'll balance slower workers. Some workers will mine from a range. Some workers will mine from melee. Some workers will be flyers. You get the idea. The Sycoran worker is a ranged worker. So the range of the weapon is the same mining range. I feel like there's an argument to be made for moving to tiles per minute based on avoiding fractions, but then there's an argument against it by having big values for the only reason being that it avoids fractions. I think big values are just as confusing as fractions in many cases. So resource nodes can be harvested by multiple workers at a time, which means if you surround the mineral field, or in this case, the resource node, with a bunch of workers, then you obviously can harvest it faster. If the resources are of different sizes, that allows you to have a bunch of other things. I don't know why you're on the warpath against pixels, Vic. They're consistent if you consider them to be full HD pixels, which is what everybody considers them to be. That's what everybody refers to when they say use it for a unit. Well, the tiers of workers are rarely going to impact the yield of the resources. They might have higher, like they might be able to return higher quantities or something, but the bigger the node, the more workers can harvest from it, assuming all of its surface area is accessible. And the resources will grow taller. The nodes will be taller if they have more resources in them, but the size of the node in terms of width, like the placement box basically, is not going to have any bearing on the quantity of resources within. So you can have one that has 2K but is really tiny or whatever. I don't actually remember if I noted that in the resources section. Probably not, because the resources section was written way before. I did note for resources, I did note that the there also is no distinction between the way that you harvest magmite versus the way that you harvest hypervials, in that you don't get the worker magically disappearing or whatever, the way that it is in Brood War. They just harvest from it like it were a regular resource node. Like it were a magmite field or whatever. Yeah, you got it, Knight of the Realm. That would be a lie, though, because they're not a liquid, they're a plasma. Noob. Hypervile sounds pretty epic. Hypervials damage workers if they're not filtered by a gas structure. We're calling it a gas structure for the sake of argument because obviously they're not gas structures. But yeah, you need to put a refinery type structure on it to make it so that they are filtered, which I don't know if it'll increase their yield, but it will at least stop them from burning your workers to death. But that means that you can the gas structures themselves are going to be a bit more pricey, and maybe some of them will even be at tier 2 or something crazy, where like you can see here, this is a 40-second build time, 200 magmite. It's much more expensive than a conventional resource, right? So conventional gas structure is in Brood War, whereas just like a gate before you could start harvesting the resource. So I think some of them will probably do that because there's going to be tiered versions of that too. So like there will be a higher tier version of the reservoir that I know one of them is going to have a turret on them for the NC fee. One of them will probably boost regeneration, that sort of thing. And the turret won't be like a dinky little turret like the turret on the bunker in StarCraft 2 Wings of Liberty. It'll be like an actual powerful turret because the idea is you're trading resource regeneration rate or more yield or something for a base defense that's obviously you in an area where maybe build space is super tight. This is the only way you'll even be able to build a base defense. So. It would be lethal damage, yeah. You can lose your workers to it. But the main thing is that obviously you just cycle workers out after to send them to the magmite lines instead of the hyper lines. But the main idea of that is like you're basically theoretically making your workers easier to snipe so that you can get quick hypervials for some like low cost thing. Like if you need a quick fulcrum as Ancifi and you only need 50 hypervials for it, so that you can start pumping out squires, and then maybe a little bit extra for a road trip or something. You know, stuff like that will be pretty interesting. I think you make the decision as to what exactly you want to do. So, yeah. That's the main idea anyway. I think it's we're looking pretty good in that respect for like diversity of openings of build orders and whatnot that actually require you to sort of juggle your workers in that sense. But if somebody scouts you doing this, then they can obviously make the determination like, oh, I can, if I rush this guy, his workers are not going to be able to help him as much. So I do like the way that changes stuff. Yeah. Obviously, this mechanic is a bit different for workers that are ranged or workers that just move faster because they'll be burning for less. They'll be taking damage less often. So this strategy is actually more geared, like it's more, it's made manifest a bit easier by regencies with workers that handle that stuff a little bit easier. Because if you can return quicker, in any capacity because you are a ranged worker harvesting from farther away, i.e. closer to your town center, or because you're a faster worker, then that's going to help you out a little bit in that sense. And there will be some regencies that can obviously make use of this mechanic a little bit easier. But the other thing that you can obviously do instead is just station a healer unit somewhere. Or in the case of the Ancifi, you could repair your workers that only cost magmite with your other workers because the apprentice has the repair ability. So it allows them to just straight up repair stuff, which is one way to do it as well, which obviously does drain magmite and stop this worker from doing something that could be related to actual resource harvesting. But you kind of get the idea there. Like there's a way that you can manipulate the system, some of these systems in a way that are pretty compelling, I would say. Where are we gonna go from here? Yeah, it's normal damage. It doesn't have any armor pen, I don't think. It'll just deal like damage over time, so need to make a unit in the game which can fake other units. Yeah, good idea. Sorry we sent you off to fucking Twitch. Did I see the Xibalba game on Steam? I did not. I think somebody may have sent me something like that, but it was a while ago. Somebody sent me a game called Armageddon Onslaught, which is obviously not even out yet. It's like a fighter game or something, and people thought I had ripped graphics from that, even though it wasn't even out. What's it called? Xibalba? Let me see. Oh, it's for somewhat recent too. I don't know if we're gonna have much competition for this one. But yeah, Xibalba is from the Mayans anyway, so that's why the name is there. Ah, shit, all of your fucking names. Well, at least Cosmonarchy isn't taken on Steam. I'll take that. I'll take that W. Yeah, Xibalba is just a universe. So you'll buy Cosmonarchy, not Xibalba. Although we did have the idea that when you buy the like one game, you get access to the others too. So I'm still not 100% sure where we lie on that one. Bunch of titles on the back burner, just in case. Yeah, I have no shortage of like impactful epic names, TBH. Dreamhold is another thing that already exists somewhere. It's like a text adventure game or something from like the 70s, I think, or 80s maybe. So that's another thing I'm not really worried about. Like it's got enough of a web presence because it's been around for so long. But it'll probably just say like the game entry on Steam or whatever would just say Cosmonarchy, and then like obviously the marketing tagline would be the definitive RTS real-time strategy experience, and then like very early on into any promotional material, it'd say Cosmonarchy is a real-time strategy game set in Xibalba. So it will set in the Xibalba universe, it should say. It will have that front and center, but not as like part of the title. Sup, a pause. We'll do get add. Oh, I also have to add a link to the missive from these structures. I get pranked. I did indeed get pranked. Static site generator sounds like what we have. Although I don't know what you mean by that exactly, but all of this stuff I just have to add files to, and it's instantly there. Oh yeah, now I have to. This, go. Okay. We got our defensive tower. Don't know about it being tier 2 and not tier 1, but they are going to want to jump for the intrusion fairly early, I think. It is pretty pricey, though, so... That's another thing I'm not 100% sure about, is, like, which regencies are going to have super pricey tech jumps. If they do have super pricey ones, they obviously have to justify that, which is why currently the tech center is the only thing you need to unlock the units, so it's almost like rolling the cost into one thing anyway. It's pretty useful. So that way, when you pay this like hefty upfront cost, you not only get access to the next tech center in line, but you get access to literally everything in tier 2. So I think that's pretty important, pretty useful. I did not tell the intrusion to enable the missive. We'll do that. All right, so I think at this point we'll just jump into some more general units. I guess it shouldn't come as a surprise to me that I've built more buildings for this regency than units initially, just because you need the buildings to actually do stuff before you can do any units. I also had access to a lot more building graphics for icon creation in general. All right, here's an idea. I'm still not actually sure about that. I think I will experiment with single color icons, but have them be colored a different primary color or a different combination. They're not really single color anyway. It's like a lot of shades of yellow and even some shades of purple in there. It's just really hard to notice. Or maybe it's like closer to brown, I guess. But either way, what I was thinking anyway was that you would have a single color or a single like singular palette, if you will, but it would be colored a different primary set depending on which regency you were at. So Ansifi would be blue because they're blue. I don't know. Makral Das would probably be some sort of like maybe like a lighter blue or a faded purple or something. And then you would obviously have the Sycora would probably be like a pinkish color. So there's like color schemes or whatever that you could sort of instill in that sense. That I think could be pretty useful. And that would also translate to the command icons as well. So stuff like attack, move, patrol, all of those things. So it wouldn't just be for units. That way you would basically instantly notice when you're looking at something like, oh, this is related to the Regency. And that would obviously be fairly useful. So I think in general, that's probably the most sensible approach for keeping things consistency and keeping like a singular sort of approach for the icons in general, but allowing you to define a certain range. And that way you know when you're looking at something like, oh, this makes sense. So here we have this. We've transcended the idea of an action verb and become a verb. Some of the names for the Sycoran structures. Euvalence, actually. See ya, homie. Thanks for your work. I like that it looks completely different on the Restream chat and YouTube chat. Really funny. Okay, so what I want the unveil to do is basically, I kind of want it to just boost shield regeneration rates in an area, but I'm not 100% sure how to balance that one out. I guess this could just be a fairly large structure or something. And then also obviously have it be that the boost is localized to a specific region. And we would just go from there. Probably. We could do something like... So yeah, we could do something like all shielded allies within. I guess we could just say 8 range of the unveil are have their shield regeneration rate boosted by 4 per second. And obviously we would have to test the values to see if they were useful enough to justify the purchase of the structure. This might actually be a concept that needs to be a little bit like more powerful, but then also more costly and maybe moved up into a different tier. Certainly could be. The other thing I was thinking about is the other thing I was thinking about is the concept of assembling the like maybe some sort of situation where the corpses would be recycled into a shield boost or something. Have more units that utilize corpses. Actually, I haven't documented any corpse utilization now that I think about it for the NC fee, which makes sense because they're a bit more conventional. Maybe they will still have something. I guess the corpse utilization is more of an avote thing for if you're going to talk about buildings and whatnot. Their defensive towers were meant to do that. Oh, this is actually B, unveil, whatever. So this is unveil. Oh, and I forgot to move it back to... It's supposed to be a tier 1 thing. I was thinking about utility units, and we already kind of have a shield regeneration thing with the Tylar. That's probably a very powerful unit, to be honest. It's a good thing it moves so slow. And it does look like tiles per minute for speed would probably be more useful for gauging speed. I think Balethal, his suggestion was pretty solid. I'll probably convert that later on in the next day or so for all of the units that are documented. These are just, I've taken graphics from other games and run them through some Photoshop actions to generate an icon for them. Eventually, we're going to have our own stuff, and the icons will also be colored appropriately. But these are of RTS units and structures, yeah. Just from different cases. Obviously, like the Kadar and Crystal Formation is one from Brood War. And CV has a little bit more from Brood War. They've got the SCV, the Comsat, Missile Turret, Factory, Barracks, that sort of thing. Goliath and Firebat. Starport over here. Machine Shop Academy. Armory. Science Facility. A couple of siege tank stuff as well. Eventually, they'll all be custom. They'll all be original. Eventually. Also, some of these don't really represent what they're eventually going to be anyway, because like some of them are, like this is supposed to be an infantry unit, but it looks more like a flying crab thing or something. What's new? Well, we documented more mechanics in the main page. The Cause Monarchy RTS game has its own page for documentation, game flow, control scheme. Control scheme will probably get updated at some point. And then there's immersive documentation for the single player content, including some word on the tutorials that we plan to include. And then, yeah, we've just been doing more general planning, basically. Other than that, our game engine has received a couple of updates. We keep working on that. And we're now able to recolor terrain at will, which is pretty nice. As you can see here, everything's been recolored. We can do... actually make that a bit. You know, stuff like this. It's a hue saturation value, and then there's also alpha. So if I wanted to like make the grass over here, I feel like maybe it's a bit too heavily darkened right now. I could cause it to fade into the base tile a little bit more, so it becomes more transparent. You do the same thing over here. And they become a bit harder to see, but a little bit more subtle in that sense. Not sure what you mean by seamless. I would like to be able to increment in 0.05 or something instead of 0.5. Or no, 0.005, I guess. Or 001 maybe. Eventually, we're going to want to incorporate the ideas of we're going to want to incorporate ideas of like being able to make a localized area of a certain terrain layer more, and this would have to be off of the tile grid. We'd have to have per pixel control, and we would basically need to be able to like just select an area and make it so that like just this area of jungle is more transparent, and that way we can actually create essentially custom textures. It's pretty nice. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think you can accomplish a lot with stuff like this. If we go back to controlling, you can see I'll explore a bit of it. So I've just tweaked some of the values for the vision and whatnot to make things a bit more consistent, and you can now have like a more believable nighttime land. Now, obviously, the units are a bit more like they haven't been affected yet. But we'll do that eventually. Basically a global light instead of it being tile bound. And then we can continue to make smaller changes to the individual tiles, which is pretty useful. All of that is synced over multiplayer, so if somebody wanted to yeah, if somebody wanted to work on like a map together with somebody else, you could. Or if you wanted to play around with the editor and make a map as somebody else was playing the game, you could. So that's pretty epic. Don't see that every day. I don't see that ever, really. Well, we didn't get a massive amount of work done on the Sycora tech tree, but I did walk a bunch of people through a bunch of stuff, which was pretty cool. And we got to show off the new tricks of the trade, so to speak. And yeah, that's pretty cool. So I think the future is pretty bright for not just the Sycora tech tree, but also the immersive planning. The more I get done with the first 2 tiers, the more I'll be able to start imagining how early games would go with the Sycora. I think currently the biggest you could say concern, I suppose, is that some of their units are a bit more high concept than maybe they ought to be at this tier. And I think the more concepts I throw together for these guys, the less that will be a concern, because these are just some of the early passes. But we're getting there. We're going to have... I probably won't linger on the Sycora as long as I've lingered on the Encifi, because I want to move on to Ember Seat, and I want to move on to some of the others. But once I have like a nice base of the first 2 or 3 tiers taken care of for all of the 6 regencies, I can then go back to focusing on individual ones to iron them all out and come up with their general concepts. And hopefully by the time that I'm done with the first pass on all of the regencies, insofar as I have those first couple of tiers done, I can also start to actually implement them in game, even if we are just still using placeholder assets. And that would be pretty epic. We'll get there slowly but surely. Maybe not even so slowly. Like I said earlier, it's only been about a month and a half, and we already have this many features. So yeah, definitely looking forward to keeping on, as they say. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and I will be back with another stream in 2 days as usual. Stay tuned for Veeks later on. And yeah, big kisses.